Call to order the Monday, June 12th, 2023 Public Works Committee. Roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro.
Here.
Vice Chair Edson.
Here.
Councilmember Lovell. Councilmember Pryor.
Here.
It looks like all three of us are here. Next up is approval of the agenda.
Chair,
Yes.
I move to approve the agenda for the June 12th, 2023 Public Works Committee.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro.
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson.
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor. Aye.
Thank you. That's 3 ayes approving the agenda. We're having public comments. Okay, no public comments. Thank you. We'll go right into the business. First up is the approval of the May 8th, 2023 Public Works Committee action letter.
Chair,
Yes.
I move
Councilmember Edson.
for approval of the May 8th, 2023 Public Works Committee action letter.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Edson, a second by Councilmember Pryor to approve the May 8th, 2023 Public Works Committee action letter. Seeing no discussion, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro.
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson.
Aye.
And Councilmember Pryor. Aye.
Motion passes to approve the May 8th, 2023 Public Works Committee action letter. Next up, TMP 2651, an ordinance approving modification number 4 to their agreement with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley, Inc. for the on-call professional planning and engineering services for the airport in the amount of $39,200, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Mike Anderson. You're not Mike Anderson.
Or Joel Arrington, right.
Or Joel Arrington.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joel Arrington, Airport Manager. This item is it's an amendment that adds a design of a lean-to ground service equipment building to the overall scope of services for the East Side Development Project, which includes Hangar 2. A lean-to building for equipment storage is something that we had thought about that we wanted when we designed the East Side. And at the onset of this, we weren't for sure if one was going to fit over there just because of spacing. But once we got Hangar 2 laid out, we determined that something was going to be able to fit. So this building would be connected to Hangar 2. It'll store aircraft servicing equipment such as tugs, ground service equipment to handle the corporate aircraft. Right now, our equipment is all stored in Hangar 1, along with all of the jets and other aircraft, and we would like to, when we design the East Side, we would like to separate the equipment from the very expensive, shiny things in the hangar. That way, things don't get ran into and scratched. So staff feels it's a good idea to, as part of this whole process, go ahead and design this now so that whether it gets included with the construction of Hangar 2, or if on down the road we decide that we want to construct this building, we'll already have it designed and ready to go. And just as a note, whenever the Hangar 2 project goes out for bid, this will be a alternate option on that bid. So we'll have to make sure that it fits into the budget before we proceed with the construction of it. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Well, thank you. Any questions from the council? No, it's pretty standard. It'll be next to the hangar, right? And there will be egress and ingress.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll have 3 garage doors and an egress door.
Okay. All right, thank you. Seeing no discussion or any questions, I'll entertain a motion, please.
Chair,
Yes, Councilmember Pryor.
I move to advance to council for approval TMP 2651, an ordinance approving modification number 4 to the agreement with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley, Inc. for on-call professional planning and engineering services for the airport, RFQ number 2020-067, in the amount of $39,200, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor, a second by Councilmember Edson to move TMP 2651 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. Seeing no discussion, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMorro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion does pass. Moving TMP 2651 to the full council. Next up, TMP 2663, an ordinance approving a congestion mitigation and air quality agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri, and the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission related to the public improvement project designated as federal project number CMAQ 3302, intersection of Ward and Purcell's within the city limits of Lee Summit, Missouri, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same. Craig Kohler. Good afternoon, Craig.
Good afternoon. Craig Kohler, Senior Staff Engineer. So the Ward and Purcell's intersection project was submitted as a candidate for this CMAQ federal funds. Project scheduled or scored real well due to congestion mitigation, improvements to traffic operations, and safety improvements. As a result, the project was allocated $1.25 million for construction work. Entering into this agreement with the Missouri Highway Transportation Commission allows the city to receive this funding. So that's about it. It's pretty basic. Is there any questions?
Anybody have any questions? This all has to do with traffic, right? Less traffic, less,
Well, we're moving the intersections right now. There's T intersections at Purcell's and they don't meet up, so we're aligning them, moving the north one south to align with the other one. Get rid of that one intersection there.
okay. No more questions. I'd entertain a motion.
Chair,
Member Edson.
I recommend to advance to council for approval TMP-2663, an ordinance approving a congestion mitigation and air quality agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri and the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission related to the public improvement project designated as federal project number CMAQ 3302 429, intersection of Ward and Purcell's within the City of Lee Summit, Missouri, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Edson, a second by Councilmember Pryor, moving TMP 2663 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMorro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
and Councilmember Pryor.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion does pass, TMP 2663 to the full council. Next up, TMP 2684, an ordinance approving modification number 6 to the agreement for professional engineering services for the Colburn Road improvements from M350 to Douglas Street with Garver LLC for an increase of $107,036 for the amended basic services with an amended not to exceed amount of $2,219,034 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Mr. Kohler again.
Yeah, so since Clarkson's been awarded the construction contract in April, with discussions between city staff and Clarkson, we've kind of caused the total amount of engineering support dollars to go up compared to the modification 5 that we did in June of 21. So basically, if you add 6 to 5, the modifications then will be covered for the construction services throughout the entire construction of the project. Is there any questions?
Any questions from the council? I don't have any. Seeing none, entertain a motion, please. Yes.
Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. I move to advance to council for approval TMP 2684, an ordinance approving modification number 6 to an agreement for professional engineering services for the Colburn Road improvements from M350 to Douglas Street, RFQ number 569-32272, with Garver LLC for an increase of $107,036 for the amended basic services with an amended not to exceed amount of $2,219,034. I'm assuming there's a comma right there, so, okay. And authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor, second by Councilmember Edson, moving TMP 2684 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. No discussion on the motion. Roll call, please.
Chairman DeMorro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. TMP 2684 to the full council. Next up, to TMP 2685, an ordinance awarding the bid for Project 795 for the curb repair FY24 program to Phoenix Concrete and Underground LLC in the amount of $2,740,197.93 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Mr. Vince Schmeger.
Vince Schmager, Project Manager. Tonight for your consideration, I have the agreement for this year's curb repair project, FY24. This project replaces curb throughout the city, specific locations. We have 8 specific locations this year. It was installed roughly between 1980 and 2005. The issue we had, the curb during that time, the aggregate that was being used, the rock, was a soft limestone that absorbs water, freezes and cracks, then goes dry, and the curb starts just kind of turning back to gravel. This year's project is set, like I said, with 8 areas. We're replacing roughly 90,000 linear feet of curb, which is just over 17 miles. We went through the bidding process, and Phoenix Concrete and Underground was evaluated to be our best and lowest bidder. Answer any questions.
Thank you, Vince. Any questions? Councilmember Edson.
I know Vince likes it when I ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so how many more miles do you have to replace of the bad curb that was installed?
Roughly 300. This puts us just over the halfway mark. It's taken us 19, 20 years to get here. We have 300 miles, and we're doing 15 to 17 miles a year.
So are we able to increase that, how much we do a year, or are we going to stick with this amount?
It's how the leadership decides we should spend the funds. I mean, we're putting, close to 8-9 million between all the curb overlays, surface seal, crack seal projects.
And is the replacement of the curb, does that come out of the transportation tax?
This comes out of transportation tax and is subsidized by the 2017 CIP. I have that right here. 2017 CIP sales tax renewal.
Okay. So at this rate,
I'll be dead.
probably me too, I don't know. Well, I'm just wondering, it's just a never-ending process.
It is. The hard part about it is right now, a lot of the worst curb we have is about 20 to 24 years old. So we have roads that have been overlaid in the last 10 years that are just now curbs really starting to fall apart, that were a late 80s, early 90s curb. And so that's a education to the public when I receive calls. And this is part of trying to coordinate it to where we do the curbs this year in these areas, and then next year the areas will be overlaid.
Okay. Mr. Park looks like he wants to jump out of his seat and interject.
I think the mayor, city council, you all take certain steps when those opportunities are presented, like using the 2017 sales tax, or we have in the past used bond funds to actually inject additional funds to try to accelerate that curb replacement. There's also going to be other projects that result in curb replacement. For example, when we add turn lanes to Langsford Road, a more recent project that hasn't yet been scheduled out but was included in the no tax increase bond issue this last April. Those curbs would be replaced through those process of other projects and capital programs. So, yeah, if we don't have any other injection of funds, it could take us another 20 years. I mean, like Mr. Schmager said, we're about halfway or just surpass that halfway mark. But we still continue to look for funding opportunities to add funds. And those could also be federal funds. We had a project more recently where we had to do some prep work for funds to help with an overlay. And similar types of opportunities may exist for curb.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know sometimes it feels like a treadmill. Yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Pryor, did you have a question?
Thank you. So I think we've gone over this before, but the stuff you're using on the curbs now, how long does it last?
It's got a life expectancy life of excess of 50 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Have you heard of the stuff, I just recently heard about it, something with concrete and plastic mixed that's supposed to last a really long time?
No, I haven't been familiar with that.
Yeah,
know
I didn't
there's-
know if that was,
There's some, I know this, we're using granite, and there are some limestones now that are getting the same hardness of the granite, which can be more produced locally here up North Kansas City. That may be a consideration in the future to maybe try to stabilize or lower the price a little bit.
okay. Thank you.
Any more questions from the council? Seeing no more questions, I'd entertain a motion, please.
Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Edson.
I moved to, I recommend to council for approval TMP-2685, an ordinance awarding the bid for project number 795 for the curb repair FY24 program to Phoenix Concrete and Underground LLC in the amount of $2,740,197.93, and authorizing the same manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Edson, a second by Councilmember Pryor to move TMP 2685 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. No discussion. Roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor,
Aye.
Passes, moving TMP 2685 to the full council. Next up, TMP 2677, an ordinance approving a fixed-based operator agreement between Messenger Aviation LLC and the city of Lee Summit, Missouri to rent office space to perform aircraft sales and aircraft brokering at the Lee Summit Municipal Airport, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same. And Mr. Arrington again.
I'm back.
Joel Arrington.
Joel Arrington, Airport Manager. This is a renewal of an FBO agreement for Meisinger. And so Meisinger Aviation's been on the airport for about 2 years now. They do aircraft brokering, aircraft sales. They'll be renting, most of their work is done via a telephone or in person, so they don't need a lot of space. But they will be renting an office there in the administration building. Even though the annual revenue from this is only a couple $1,000s, they rent hangar space from us quite frequently. Right now, they've got an aircraft in there that's $1,700 a month that they're renting. So, there's more in addition to just the office space. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Seeing no questions, entertain a motion. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. I move to advance to council for approval TMP 2677, an ordinance approving a fixed-base operator agreement between Messenger Aviation LLC and the city of Lee Summit, Missouri to rent office space to perform aircraft sales and aircraft brokering at the Lee Summit Municipal Airport, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor, a second by Councilmember Edson to move TMP 2677 to full council with a recommendation of approval. Roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor,
Aye.
And the motion passes. Next up, TMP 2679, an ordinance approving a fixed-based operator agreement between Rebel Aviation and the city of Lee Summit, Missouri to rent office space and hangar space to perform flight training, aircraft rental, aircraft maintenance, and inspection services at the Lee Summit Municipal Airport, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same. Mr. Arrington.
Joel Arrington, Airport Manager. Again, this is another renewal of a fixed-base operator with Rebel Aviation. They've been on the airport since 2017, and they currently do flight training, and we've included in this particular agreement the ability to do maintenance in the hangar that they rent from us. So that's an addition. Also on this agreement, which is new from the last one, like with our other FBOs, they'll be paying all the utilities in the hangar, and their insurance has changed just slightly. So that's why we're bringing this forward to you.
Any questions from the council? Have any either, so. Motion,
Chair,
Councilmember Edson.
I move to recommend to council for approval TMP-2679, an ordinance approving a fixed-base operator agreement between Rebel Aviation and the city of Lee Summit, Missouri, to rent office and hangar space to perform flight training, aircraft rental, aircraft maintenance, and inspection services at the Lee Summit Municipal Airport, and authorizing the mayor to execute the same.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Edson, a second by Councilmember Pryor, moving TMP 2679 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. No discussion on the motion. Roll call, please.
Oh, wait,
Oh, you have,
your discussion.
do you have discussion?
I do have discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
Um,
Thank you.
When are we gonna change the name of the airport?
Well,
I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Joel Arrington.
You will see a request for that sometime in the near future, yeah. So part of the business plan, the 2020 business plan that was adopted by City Council, recommended as part of the branding of the airport that we look at possibly changing the name and possibly coming up with a name for our FBO, our business as well. So you will see something coming forward when Hangar 2 gets a little bit closer.
Oh, okay. So who's going to make that suggestion? Is that internal staff or?
It will probably start with internal staff. One of the things that we're looking at doing is going outside to get a third party involved to help consult with us on a whole branding strategy, because it's more than just the name of the airport. It's everything has to change. We need to rebrand the logo and the look and the colors and everything. So we'll probably go out and get some advice on that, and then of course we'll have internal discussions.
But if council members aren't involved, we can't name it like the Fred DeMoro Airport. Or the so I think we need to be involved in those discussions.
Yes, I'm sure you will be involved, yes.
All right, didn't mean to hijack the conversation, but thank you.
Councilmember Pryor, did you have a discussion item?
I was just wondering if you had any names. Have you guys tossed around any names? or
We
no?
we might have a few names in mind, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you share them or no?
I'm not quite ready to do that just yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Joel, we had, yeah,
So,
that's in her
Phyllis.
district, yeah. We had a consultant a couple of years ago. Are we going to incorporate some of that gentleman's ideas too? I think he touched on that, about branding and marketing and things like that. I don't remember his name, but I don't remember what company he was with.
I can address some of that. I believe during the presentation of the airport business plan, there was probably some suggestions of creating a name and a brand for the Lee Summit Airport that is more recognizable by the aviation industry across the country. You probably, in those presentations, which are publicly available, you heard such as Kansas City Regional, you heard other names during that presentation. I think that's where Mr. Arrington has suggested a third party with experience in the industry can provide us recommendations that really would hit the mark, and I'm sure we will be engaging with you all when those recommendations come forward.
Because he made a very good point that because the word municipal is in the airport, a lot of people discount that or just, ignore that we're here because they think it's a small landing strip or whatever. Municipal means things different in the aviation industry, and so
Yeah.
I think everybody was on board at that time to get it changed. So we have a lot of business up there, but we can always attract more.
Can always do better, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes, moving TMP 2679 to the full council with a recommendation of approval. Next up, TMP 2711, An ordinance approving the award of bid number 2021-066 to Tandem Paving Company, Inc. for on-call asphalt construction repairs and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same for a period of 1 year with 4 possible one-year renewal options. Vince Smager again.
Vince Schmager, project manager. This agreement set up to be an on-call asphalt repair. Rely a lot on my projects, specifically the surface seal project, where we want to put the surface seal down because it's such a thin coating. We want to put it on secure pavement. So this is to go in there and cut out a 20 by 20, a 12 by 100, and replace 2, 4, 6 inches of asphalt in specific areas ahead of that project. But it is being set up so it can be used for other projects throughout the city, or if I have something going during the crack seal program, we actually have something to fall back on. I know Sean's, Mr. Graff's area down operations, they're full just keeping up with what they do on a day-in basis, let alone to throw repairs from a capital project on them. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Any questions from the council? So this would basically, just for clarification, it would basically repair before the actual overlay, so we don't have failures in the overlay after, a couple years after the overlay.
Yeah, that's going to help more with the surface seal. The overlay, we already have this built into the overlay contract, because a lot of those soft areas we don't know until they take 2 inches off of it, and the heavy mills and the heavy dump trucks break up some road, and we can make those repairs for that project.
Okay. Very good. Other questions? No more questions? Roll, motion, please.
I move to advance to council for approval TMP 2711, ordinance approving the award of bid number 2021-066 to Tandem Paving Company, Inc. for on-call asphalt construction and repairs, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same for a period of 1 year with 4 possible one-year renewal options.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor, a second by Councilmember Edson, moving TMP 2711 to the full council with recommendation of approval. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Chairman DeMoro,
Aye.
Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor,
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. Next up, 2023-5658, item 2023-5658, a resolution supporting the Regional Climate Action Plan. We have Michael Park, Director of Public Works.
Thank you, and good evening. Michael Park, Director of Public Works. This evening, we're put forward a resolution of support for the Regional Climate Action Plan. At this point in time, the city's adopted a comprehensive plan, a strategic plan, both named Ignite. And in fact, an entire section of the city's comprehensive plan is an element on sustainability, which includes climate action. But the city has not adopted a climate action plan itself. And the reason we're proposing this at this time, which this climate action plan was developed over the course of several years, adopted by the MARC board in 2021, and in fact, our staff and our city was involved and engaged throughout that process of developing the plan. And that plan was adopted by over 18 other jurisdictions within the MARC region, more than 80% of the entire population represented. But to this date, we haven't adopted that, and I can't explain why or why not. We have or haven't. But it's time in our assessment that we consider adopting that plan. In particular, this came to our attention as we're reviewing federal funding opportunities. There's $4.6 billion associated with the Inflation Act and the bipartisan legislation for a lot of funds that are available tied to sustainable improvements or climate mitigation. And so what we found in that particular $4.6 billion, and there's a lot of other funds tied to sustainability, is that there's a prerequisite that you have a plan. without a plan, you aren't eligible to apply for projects. Projects like Arnold Hall, where we built a sustainable parking lot with pervious pavers. A project like the Market Street development, where you're converting a two-way roadway to a pedestrian plaza, to sidewalks. All of these are examples of activities that the city already undertakes that can reduce the carbon footprint and are eligible activities for federal funds. And so we would like to see the city express support of a plan, this being the Regional Climate Action Plan, to allow us to be eligible for those funding opportunities as they're presented. It's a voluntary participation. It's not an adoption of every element of the Climate Action Plan. I think it allows for each jurisdiction to pick the parts that are applicable to its community and the projects that it wants to pursue. It's not a binding funding commitment for this plan, but it does show the regional support, and it falls under a regional umbrella of a plan that we can say, here's a project that aligns with that plan, also aligns with our comprehensive plan, so that we can pursue those funds. And I'm here, as well as Mr. Tom Jacobs from Mark, who will come forward and give you an overview of what that plan is, and then we're both available for any questions that you might have. Mr. Jacobs?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tom Jacobs. I lead the environmental programs at Mark. And Mr. Park, thank you for the introduction. We had the pleasure of working on this regional climate action plan over about a 2.5-year period. We kicked it off in the fall before the pandemic, and we're just amping things up. There was a lot of excitement, so much so we were getting ready to reserve one of the ballrooms in Bartle Hall for a large community workshop. And then, of course, we canceled that and took this whole thing online and had an infinity of Zoom meetings with probably, we believe we touched over 1,000 people in the development of this plan. And at the conclusion of this work, we shared it with the Mark Board of Directors and all of the relevant Mark committees. And ultimately, they voted to adopt this plan in March of 2021. As Michael said, one of the key aspects here is that the plan it's not binding. It's a voluntary framework. There's a set of strategies that we offer to local communities to consider and adopting in a way that makes sense for your local context, given local needs and opportunities and constraints. And it's nothing more than that. We've done a lot of analysis. We've done a lot of work to try and think about what makes sense for this region. But as we've shared this plan with Jackson County, Kansas City, Missouri, the Johnson County Commission, lots of other communities, everybody's looking at it and thinking about, well, how does it align with our plans and needs? And it's in that spirit that I offer this. So. There were a lot of different reasons we put this together, and again, Michael spoke to the first one. We want to build from success. So last year we recognized a project at Mark's annual Sustainable or Resilient Success Stories event for some outstanding stormwater projects. And there's just so much going on in this community that is consistent with the spirit of what this plan's about, right? All the downtown redevelopment, all the trails, the parks, the stormwater work, and more. And those are precisely the kinds of things that we would suggest. Our plan has elements in about 6 different categories, the kinds of things that you might find if you were to look up, climate plans from around the country. We talk about urban greening. We talk about building energy efficiency. We talk about renewable energy, solid waste management, transportation, innovation, public health, social equity, right? These are the things that we've put forward. And we organized our plan into 2 different pieces. One is about climate mitigation and the other is climate adaptation. So the mitigation piece is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and the adaptation piece is about how do we deal with what's coming at us, even though we don't know what the future really holds. The future's uncertain, but we know that it's going to be different than what we've dealt with in the past. And so in those 2 areas, on the mitigation side, we began with a regional greenhouse gas inventory. So we asked, where are we at? How much do we as a region contribute in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? And the answer was, using 2015 data, we started this plan in 2019, was about 30 million metric tons a year of carbon dioxide equivalents. And if nothing were to change, we estimated that number would grow to 37 million metric tons by 2050. And our plan's goal it's clearly ambitious and aspirational, but it's to be a net zero region by 2050. So ask the question, how do we get from 37 to 0? And the first two buckets there were about renewable energy and energy efficiency. So when we look at Evergy and their work over the last, I'd say 15 years, they now have well over 4,500 megawatts of wind that they've invested in. And solar is just starting to boom in this community. And so there's huge investment in renewables, and their integrated resource plan says that they'll be net zero as a utility by 2045. So we're making progress on that front. There are many communities that have entered into agreements with the utility to use renewable sources, and that's out there. On the efficiency side, we always say the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use, right? And in the national and international literature, the low-hanging fruit in this world of climate mitigation is by using less energy in our buildings, whether our homes, offices, public buildings, or whatnot. And we frame this in a lot of different ways. At one level, it's just about saving money. Another level, it improves the health and wellness of the occupants inside of buildings. And another level, it's good for the environment. And so there's a lot of fabulous work all over the community along these lines, retrofitting public buildings, thinking about taking advantage of all of the utility and the federal incentives that are included in the Inflation Reduction Act. There's an opportunity to really accelerate this work. The next piece on the mitigation side is about transportation. So I'd say in our inventory, just over 60% of all our emissions come from using energy in buildings, whether it's industrial, commercial, institutional, residential. And then just about a third is associated with transportation. And so the big driver there over the long term is electrifying the fleet, right? More and more electric cars are hitting the market all the time, and as those are powered with renewable energy, it's a good deal. But then there's other issues too. So we talk about alternative transportation, creating communities that are more walkable, that are more bikeable, where folks maybe ride share more, where there are opportunities to take advantage of public transportation. Those in turn create positive benefits on the transportation side. In the world of recycling and solid waste management, the accounting methodology that we used showed that only about 2% of our emissions come from using materials and disposing of them. If we used a different methodology and we looked at extended supply chains, that number would grow a whole lot, because the aluminum can that I might throw away, if I were to throw away an aluminum can, right, it's mined in Brazil and processed somewhere else. So that energy that we would be saving would accrue to some other part of the world. But the last piece on the mitigation side that we work to get all the way to zero, we put in a bucket called sequestration. How much carbon can we put in the ground by planting trees, restoring streams and wetlands and prairies and forests, and by supporting regenerative or sustainable agriculture, just things like cover cropping that put more carbon in the ground. And so that's a big piece. That's the most all of this is speculative in some level, but thinking about all the natural ecosystem restoration things we can do that are good on the mitigation side. Moving to the adaptation side of the plan, we did something that's called a downscale climate model. So you might read in the press about global climate change, and so you ask the question, what does it mean for Kansas City or Dubuque or Omaha or anywhere? And so the models are getting better and better at trying to show what it means for where you live. And our model showed that there's three main things that we need to be concerned about moving forward. One's more flooding, one's drought, and the third is excessive heat. And so, and we know there's all kinds of vulnerable populations around our region. Just this last week, right, with all the bad air quality and thinking about kids with asthma or folks with respiratory diseases or cardiovascular diseases. These are people at risk and from worsening air quality, and so we're trying to figure out, well, what can we do? Or maybe we're thinking about elderly, or maybe thinking about socioeconomic status or other factors that might create risks. And so along those lines, there's a variety of opportunities that we identified. For me, the low-hanging fruit in the whole climate adaptation world is planting a tree, because there's so many benefits, right? you cool the city, you improve public health, you can conserve energy by reducing urban heat islands. Trees can turn the soil into a sponge. Trees and green infrastructure can turn the soil into a sponge, so you can reduce flood risk and improve water quality. The leaves on a tree create depositional spaces for particulate matter in the air. It creates cleaner air. So it's just, and it improves, walkable streets and real estate values. I mean, it's like 10 wins inside of that. And when we tie tree planting and think about it at a larger scale, and maybe you're thinking about a forest or a wetland or a stream or a prairie at larger scales, there's opportunities to restore nature in ways that provide lots of different benefits. During the pandemic, we saw just staggering problems of food insecurity. At that time, it was like 1 in 4 households. I think maybe now we're back down to a still unbelievable level, maybe 1 in 7 or 1 or 8 households. So as a region, we throw away something like 200,000 tons per year of food waste, which is just a mind-numbing number. And so we're trying to figure out, well, of the food that's recoverable and usable, can we capture that and get it to folks who are in need? For the food that isn't recoverable, we can compost it and create jobs in the process, reduce methane emissions in the landfill, and put that on the ground as a floodplain management strategy or to support, to make a home garden more productive or an orchard more productive or whatnot. And so we're creating jobs and improving the environment and addressing food security all at the same time. So those are the kinds of strategies we're looking for, where there's lots of different benefits from every dollar invested. The mobility piece is part of that, thinking in parts of the community where maybe there are 0-car households, can we create more transportation options or make it easier for folks to get to work by public transportation, walking, biking, ride sharing. There's a panoply of opportunities to address the adaptation questions and the mitigation questions. And so as I share this plan with you and ask for your consideration of the plan, there's lots of different ways that you might act upon the strategies that are provided. So on one level, there's opportunities for the city to lead by example, which you're already doing, right, with your municipal facilities and infrastructure kind of showing the way. There's opportunities to think about, how do you be a good partner? How do you work with the chamber, with hospitals, with schools, with kids, with whoever in town wants to work with you in ways that create positive momentum towards what you're doing. So I share this plan with you in kind of a quick overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope that that you find it useful to you as you can think about how you might implement your comprehensive plan, your strategic plan, and be able to undertake climate-friendly activities that are right for Lee Summit. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Jacobs, I'm going to start off with a couple questions before I give it to the council members to ask questions. But I am curious, what does zero emissions look like? Because in my mind, how do we operate without emissions?
It's probably impossible, right? I mean, it seems unlikely. But it's when you think about how the world is changing, there are buildings now that are net positive. Not a lot of them, but there's some that that generate more energy that they use and capture their own water and don't generate any waste. Those are almost sort of rhetorical statements architecturally, showing you can do it. But the world is moving that way, right? Our technology's getting better and cheaper. Solar's cheaper than it's ever been. It's probably a fourth or a fifth of what it cost 10 years ago. And so the opportunities to get there are becoming more realistic. But I'd probably imagine over time we're still looking at offsets in some manner. There's going to be some emissions from the way that our society is organized and the way we use energy, and we can figure out how to compensate.
And you mentioned that Evergy is committed. Evergy, which is our main electrical supplier, they are the electrical supplier. Yeah. To be zero by 2050.
I think it's 2045, if I remember right.
2045. Will they have the infrastructure, you think, possibly by that time? I mean, I'm just imagining the amount of power generation by the sources, the sources we use now, and the other sources are coming on, I know, but
Yeah,
that's a lot of infrastructure. And
it
so
sure
I'm trying
is.
to get my head around that.
So there's all kinds of arguments that people have about this. One of the biggest is, can the grid handle it, right? And it's a really expensive proposition to redo the grid. And it's a big question and a legitimate question. What's interesting to me is, I remember back in 2005 when they built the Iatan 2 plant over by Weston. It was a 700 megawatt plant, and they were sued by Sierra Club, and they agreed to offset that new plant with 400 megawatts of wind and 300 megawatts of energy efficiency investments. That was their first wind. And so today, the last time I saw a published number was 4,400, but that was about a year and a half ago, and I know they've built some more wind farms since then. Their total fleet generation is about a little bit over 13,000 megawatts. On a regular day, over 50% of their production right now is carbon-free. They have a little bit of nuclear and they have a little bit of hydro, but it's mostly this wind and the growing solar part. So I'm feeling pretty confident about it. It feels like the game changer is going to be batteries. As soon as we can store some of this wind and solar to use it when it's not sunny or the wind's not blowing, we're good. Because sun and wind are already far cheaper than coal is. So it feels like technology is changing quickly and the market is changing, consumer behavior is changing. So I'm feeling confident about it. I'm just looking at this one 15-year trajectory, and they went from 0 to 50 in a blink of an eye.
Then I've got one more question before I turn it over to
Please.
council members, and that is the makeup of all the people involved. And I just took a small survey of the amount of people involved, the government officials, elected officials, and staff. And I found very quickly, and so I'm going to ask, there's one person from Lee Summit. There's 30 from Johnson County. And so the disparity, I'm wondering how that happened, that we are Lee Summit, Missouri is 7% of the population of the metropolitan area. We've got one person on this group.
Yeah,
Johnson County has 30.
it's true. I won't try and explain it away. Part of what happened as we launched this plan was there was a new organization called Climate Action KC. Is that a group with which you're familiar? No. So it was launched by then Mayor Mike Kelly in Roland Park, and then Councilwoman Lindsay Constance of Shawnee. And Mike is now the chairman of the Johnson County Board of Commissioners. And the two of them called all their friends, and they were all Johnson Countyans. And they provided a lot of oomph for this. And then on top of that, historically, the other community that had been really present in this space was Kansas City, Missouri. And so I would say the lion's share of folks who participated in this were from Kansas City and from the different Johnson County communities. And so Johnson County is really, I'd attribute it to Mike and Lindsay, is that we tried to reach out to others through MARC committees and other mechanisms, and I wish we had been more successful in that regard. The way I think of it is we could always do better. And moving forward, to the extent that the summit would want to consider this plan, our doors are open. We want to work with everybody. And, the kind of space that I live in is one where I'm looking for collaborative opportunities. So if there's something that a bunch of communities all share an interest in, and we can kind of figure out how to make it cheaper, smarter, better by working together, then that's what I do for a living. So I'd say, though, also, some of the stuff, this climate tent is a really big tent. And so, I remember, gosh, it was probably 10 years ago when you chaired the Complete Streets work group at MARC. And all that work around Complete Streets fits part and parcel within the climate plan. It's also been in the last 3 regional transportation plans, and Lee Summit's been well represented in that. So sometimes it kind of depends on where you put a line on something, right? Same thing around the stormwater management issues. we've been working closely with Lee Summit for several years on a Little Blue River watershed effort with the Corps of Engineers. And so we work with them, and it's consistent with the plan, but it's not named in the plan, right? So it gets a little bit more slippery, too.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask the council members if they have any questions. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. I will just start off by saying that I am all about doing what is good for our environment and potentially even adopting a plan that's good for our environment. This plan, all 85 pages, when I was looking through it, it was a lot to read. I don't know that I'm comfortable adopting a resolution that, I mean, in my opinion, I feel like half of this didn't have anything to do with what I think of when I think of climate. But I also feel like, I know you said that there's no commitment with any of this. I have a hard time believing if we pass a resolution that there's no commitment with any of this. So I was wondering, who funded this plan? Who funded the study?
So let me take, I'd love to hear more about what you think would be. It'd be a fun conversation to have to the extent that we have time to do that. And I will before I answer your main question, when I took this to the MARC board, they were emphatic that MARC has no role in telling any community what to do. And the one who spoke most clearly on this point of everybody on our board was Mayor Mike Boehm from the city of Lenexa. And he says, I don't want one of my residents calling me up and saying, you adopted this plan, so why aren't you doing, this thing on page 62, right? And so we worked very diligently to craft the language to that effect, and so much so that on page 2, just inside the front cover, it says this plan's a voluntary framework that doesn't bind anybody to do anything. It's for every local community to tailor and use at its discretion, or whatever words we picked. And so that's the spirit with which we offer it. MARC as an organization has no authority over anybody. Our only authority is to convene, and where we can find opportunities to build consensus, that's what we do. And so now that I've been windy, your main question was, who funded this? Let me finish, and then I'll. So when we wrote this plan, we received help from the European Union's International Urban and Regional Cooperation Program. And by help, that means that they funded a consultant that helped us with our emissions inventory and our risk and vulnerability assessment. And then we asked them questions as we were writing the thing. Our staff wrote it, and our staff, the funding for our staff time, we are covered by our quality funds or transportation planning funds or some other kind of planning funds that we had obtained, and used that while we also did our other jobs to meet the goals for which that funding was provided.
I just want to reassure, this is an enormous framework of strategies, from stormwater to complete streets to, you name it, building efficiencies, where think of ourselves as voluntary contributors to the success of this regional plan. There is no overarching body. MARC board is not obligating you to perform any one strategy, to do any particular project. You can do absolutely nothing. You can continue to do what you're doing, which is actually still contributing to the plan through the various projects that you're approving year after year that you see be built. You're contributing in a voluntary way without the support or endorsement officially of this plan. I think what advantages you have of adopting this plan and the absence of our own plan is we become eligible for some of those other funding sources for these exact same projects we're intending to carry out regardless. If we don't approve this plan, we will need to develop our own plan if it's our intent to pursue those same funding sources. And so I wouldn't be fearful of all of the things in the plan that really don't apply to Lee Summit or don't fit our context or don't fit where we want to invest our funds, because we don't. They don't set our priorities. We set our own priorities, we set our own projects, and many of those projects already align. And so we're just trying to take advantage of what's already been completed.
I guess one of the reasons I'm so weary is after the whole homeless thing that I was reading, and I feel like everything that was in it, I am a little weary of, I'm actually very weary of this. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. I want to make sure that there's nothing in there that's, again, I know you say that it's non-binding, but how do we know that it's non-binding? Like, how do we, I don't know. So I do have a couple more questions. What counties and cities have adopted this plan?
I believe there's 19 jurisdictions that have approved of this plan so far, or they've submitted resolutions of endorsement or resolutions of support by way of their approval. I don't know that I can list all 19 off the top of my head, but
Get over 10.
I was gonna say, you have, I'm sure, Lenexa, Overland Park, Shawnee, Kansas City, Independence?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, Blue Springs?
No.
Okay. Tell me when I'm right. Raymore?
So we had a couple of Northland communities.
Okay.
So
Jackson County, Johnson County,
Yeah.
Platte County, Clay County?
no.
No. So a majority of those 19 are likely on the Kansas state line, but there are some on the Missouri state line.
Have any not adopted this plan that has looked at it?
I don't know that any have rejected the plan, that have considered an endorsement or support, that have said no.
Okay, again, you said that it was voluntary, but I also am concerned about what I'm committing the future citizens of Lee Summit, the current citizens of Lee Summit to in the future. Just what kind of,
None. But, I mean, you're not committing anything. There's no project or funding commitment associated with this plan. This is a plan of strategies, a lot of strategies that we use in our CIP on a regular basis. And it's saying, can we take those strategies, we align them with this plan as we apply for implementation grants.
okay.
And we could choose, not to as a community. We could say, no, we don't want that plan. We're going to continue to use our comprehensive plan. And we're going to continue to do those same projects, but we will cut off access to those funds where this is a prerequisite.
There are some good things in the plan. There's just a lot of things in the plan that are kind of not great, in my opinion. So that's where I am.
And it's a list of strategies. It's not telling you you need to do all of these things.
Thank you.
The Mayor Pro Tem from Lee Summit was involved in the process to review and approve this plan. As a member of the MARC board, he might be one to consult about the voluntary nature of it.
Go ahead. I think that, Councilmember Pryor, there's a lot of language in this document, language in the resolution, that tends to be, depending on how, in what context the sentence or the paragraph is, that tends to be controversial, thought-provoking, and I believe that's where Councilmember Pryor is coming from. Even the resolution talks about equitable access to benefits. So I will stop there. I just, I think I was following Councilmember Pryor and the controversy. Councilmember Edson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Park, if I heard you correctly, you said in order to get access to federal funding, we have to have some sort of plan in place.
To some of those funds. I referenced just one pot of funding. The Inflation Reduction Act has a set of funds for climate action projects, projects that reduce our carbon footprint, that have a positive impact on climate. There's $4.6 billion nationwide through a two-step process. The first step is a planning process. It's a prerequisite. You have to have a climate action plan. And actually, I think through Mid-America Regional Council over the course of the next several months, they will be refining this climate action plan to identify priorities of implementation. And it will be then those projects that are under the umbrella of a climate action plan that you would submit for that federal funding.
Okay.
No certainty that you get any money, but that's a very large pot of funds for projects that relate to stormwater, that relate to trails and parks and urban forestation and everything of this very large umbrella that climate action addresses.
Sure. So what you said was, though, that we need to have a climate action plan in place. We do not have to have buy-on to the regional climate action plan that's presented to us, correct?
That is true.
Okay.
We can form and adopt our own climate action plan.
Okay, so I agree with Councilmember Pryor. I mean, I don't want to pass a resolution on something where I'm like, yeah, some of this is great, and the rest of it, I just don't agree with at all, because that just makes us look bad and stupid, really. I mean, if we're adopting something and we can't sell this to the people we represent, that makes us look terrible, and I don't want to do that. But what I think, and you all, I'm just throwing this out there, there's some really good stuff in here. There's some really things that we don't agree with, but there's some really good stuff. Why couldn't we go through this and pick and choose what we want to adopt and come up with our own city plan and adopt that into a resolution and do that as a committee? Chair?
That's an excellent idea. Excellent idea. I think that you know, from reading, I don't even know how many pages are there. 100 and, yeah.
170.
Yeah, you know, there's, like I said, you know, we were, and I don't want to completely refer to what we did a few weeks ago, but some of this language is it just fundamentally not the way we think. And it's not that we're uncaring or unresponsive. And if we could take this document and pull the things that are important to us and that are that are environmentally sustaining. I mean, as you know, if you're aware, we are doing like the pervious pavers. We just had an ordinance. You heard it. The mitigation, the air quality mitigation. Those all tie into environmental sustainability. So we are doing a lot of things, but I think it's a very excellent idea. We take this document, we pull the things out that are important to a climate action plan that we actually develop. And I go back to Lee Summit really didn't have representation for whatever reason. These are wonderful people. Believe me, I recognize many of those names. They're wonderful, wonderful people. But we really didn't have representation or a say in what this document says, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's easier for us to buy in when we've actually participated in the process.
Yes. I
You
think
know,
so.
and I think this is a great resource. I think it gives us a start. But if we're not going to get in trouble with copyright laws or anything and, you know, and pull stuff out, and plagiarize a little bit.
I wrote the thing, so copy and paste as much as you want.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Mr. Park, did you have a comment?
No, I think that's fine. I'll have to dive a little more detail. I'm not prepared tonight to look at the mechanics of how that works or what timeline it would take to create a City of Lee Summit Climate Action Plan. I'm even sensitive to the terms climate action plan, but that's specifically what the legislation seeks is a climate action plan being adopted and that you're following the framework of that plan. So we'll see if we can't pull something together. We'll table this, but then to not just support a plan, but find some mechanism to adopt a plan. We'll hope we can do something within the next 4 months before a call for project applications occurs. That's kind of the timeline we're looking at.
Okay. Is everybody in agreement? All right, I think that's an excellent plan.
Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
very much.
I sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
So, get my agenda back here in front of me. Next up, discussion of this is item 2023-5686, a discussion private utility relocations with capital roadway improvement projects. Mr. Park.
Yeah, unlike the last agenda item, we don't have a presentation. This is really more just a question and answer. It was referred to committee from a previous city council meeting when we talked in roundtable about undergrounding utilities that could be telecommunication utilities, electric utilities, those that are above ground on typically wood poles, could be on metal poles if they're a little higher voltage or they don't have the space. And really what we would like to do tonight is explore what questions you have. It's very unlikely I'm able to answer all of those questions. That way we have some time to go back and research what those questions are so we can have a little more informed discussion. Questions such as, where are we interested in undergrounding utilities? Is it every roadway? Is it just new construction, new major arterials? Is it downtown, just downtown gateways? These are the kind of question and answer that hopefully we can dive into. And for example, when also do we want to do this? Is just part of when we're delivering a brand new roadway on a new alignment like a sheer parkway? Or is it a road reconstruction? Or is this a standalone projects? Do we want to go back, create a capital improvement project, underground utilities? Because the whole situation of undergrounding utilities, they're entitled to use our right-of-way. It's why they're there. It's why a lot of times they're above ground, because it's cheaper to go above ground, especially on an existing road as opposed to a new road, where new subdivisions are built, more cost-effective to go underground, they're better protected. But, you know, that's at our expense if we want them to go underground. You know, they're in the right-of-way, they're entitled to be there, they're entitled to say how they're located. And if we want to dictate whether they're underground, above ground, which side of the road, we need to pay for that. And in some cases, you know, we would always expect that they would design, they would construct, so we're relinquishing control over some of our capital project timelines. And some of these, I can tell you, will be at very extreme costs. So as we kind of entertain the conversation of where, think about the budget on what that's going to do, the project commitments we've already scoped, because none of our projects have been scoped with undergrounding utilities. I get the aesthetic and the impacts that could have. I mean, it may mean that we have a committed project we can't complete because we've structured our capital improvement program or a no tax increase bond issue or sales tax issue with a certain defined parameter of cost, number of projects we intended to do. And so when we begin rescoping those, we need to see how much money we have left. Is it a project already underway, or are we just talking about future projects that we need to start looking towards? And then another question we have is, what is the preservation of that decision? So while we may have reconstructed a road and we determine that they go underground, the state entitles them to relocate again, or a new utility can come in the corridor and they can go above ground. So how, and these are probably some more legal questions, what is our assurance, what is our preservation that the corridor maintains that aesthetic? And so if we're going to put millions of dollars into undergrounding a utility, how do we have an assurance that that utility remains underground, or that another utility of a different company doesn't come in and ruin that aesthetic that we've tried so hard to achieve? And so those are some of the big questions that I think I don't have an answer to all of them, but I think we need to think about. So with that, I kind of want to open that up, kind of get your perspective of really what's driving this, I assume, is aesthetics, and see what questions you have.
Thank you, Michael. Questions, comments?
This is Councilmember Pryor's project.
Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. So I do think it's important, in my opinion, to have the gateways, to have the utilities buried. I think with redoing 3rd Street and Douglas, I don't see why we wouldn't bury the utilities along the gateways into downtown. But even, I mean, if you're on 291 and you're looking down 291, there's so many power lines that it doesn't even look good. And I will also say that throughout the summer, downtown Lee Summit, it's not uncommon to lose power sometimes twice a week, sometimes every other week, and they adjust our Nest thermostat all the time because the power grid cannot handle, we get messages saying it can't handle, too many people are using their air conditioning. So, and I don't know if that will affect it, but I feel like if it would, then it's definitely worth it. I think it falls on Evergy a lot more than they're wanting to take responsibility for it, apparently. But, yeah, I think 3rd Street and Douglas. If we're already redoing a roadway, why wouldn't we just spend, I think you said $1 million to,
That was just kind of a ballpark. We didn't have Evergy do any design. It would take a contract between the city and the utility to provide for the scope, cost, and the design work, and then the relocation agreement. Sometimes there are 2 separate agreements, sometimes they're all together. We just kind of said, hey, this is over $1 million for just 3rd Street to underground the one utility, and that's Evergy. So there's also co-locations of other utilities on those same poles. And then we would need to enter into agreement to relocate those as well. So I want to make sure I'm hearing that your interest is really the downtown gateways, or is it also other roadways?
I think all gateways into the city.
Okay.
I think, I mean, as Councilmember Lovell said, looking at all of that, what's the name of it over there next to Target, the brand-new development?
Pryor Road? Streets of West Pryor?
Looking at those huge power lines right there, it's not super attractive.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I didn't mean, I'm talking out loud. Go ahead.
And that, I mean, there's so many power lines running through there
Okay.
that, I don't know. I think any gateway, I mean, of course, pending cost. I don't want to make the city go broke or anything trying to do this. But if it's feasible, I do think it looks a lot nicer. And I think other cities have been able to achieve it, that, I don't know.
I've got comments.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, as long as you want. Good.
No, that's,
I was just going to say, what is the, speaking of the overhead lines at the Streets of West Pryor, is there a restriction on voltage that you can put underground, or?
So anything with enough money can be put underground. I know our Unified Development Ordinance limits what's required to be underground based on voltage. If it's a high voltage transmission line, typically 3-phase, those are accepted. They don't have to go underground. Anything that's more on your distribution system, they're required to go underground. These are new subdivisions though, and as I said, when you're building a new subdivision, you're in a greenfield, I think it's more cost effective, especially when you look at the long-term cost and risk of a utility being above ground versus underground. It makes sense. They want to go underground. You're building the roads, you're cutting in everything, they just go. But when you're in an existing corridor, it's already built up, that's when a utility will weigh its risk and its cost benefit. And that's where Streets of West Pryor, they saw those higher voltage lines, said, no, we're not going to expend that kind of dollar to when maybe it needed to be encased. When you get to the higher voltage lines, there's a requirement of separation, and I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't know what those thresholds are, but I do know that when you're close to high voltage lines, there is a certain amount of energy that's radiating from those. They create interference with telecommunications, and you can actually feel them. I've had staff who are within 10 feet of a high voltage line, and they feel it. That's not something you just easily underground. I mean, you have to take additional precautions. A lot of times when you look at undergrounding utilities, we need to increase our right-of-way width. We have to go beyond that, or we have to acquire private easements for them to be in, which is more impactful to the adjacent properties. And so I think that's a case-by-case, project-by-project decision that utilities go in. We have seen them underground in some cases. We saw utilities underground even with 3rd Street west of 50 Highway and associated with that project. We see them go to co-locate where they may be on both sides of the road and they decide it's cheaper to go on one side of the road with taller poles. That all happens. And I can say when we design a project, unless we're interfering with private easements where we bear all that cost, our improvements within the right-of-way are not with regard to where the utilities are. In fact, sometimes we may design with some intent to see where they need to move and perhaps try to encourage them to go underground as their most cost-effective solution.
Would there have to be an increase of the right-of-way that we currently have, the right-of-way that we our standard right-of-ways.
I think that's a great possibility. If we are going to have a standard of undergrounding all the utilities, we need to create a larger corridor, whether it's by our right-of-way or by acquiring easements for them to be in.
And as you said before, that, for example, if utilities are buried underground, encased, we run the risk of another utility coming, a clone of Google Fiber, and they said, no, we want to run ours on poles or on street lights or whatever. And then we can't, in other words, we cannot compel them to bury.
Well, that's a question I figured would come up. We haven't yet visited with the legal department to do more research, but exactly is the question, other utilities, or even the same utility we undergrounded, what is there to obligate them to stay underground? You know, by statute, they're entitled to use our right-of-way, and we're not dictating where they're at. Now, if we perhaps create certain special easements, maybe there's some language there, we haven't explored that, but.
Does it eliminate, so burying them underground, does it eliminate, like all the time we're told, oh, well, the fuse blew, the fuse blew, but does it eliminate fuses blowing like they do in downtown currently? And why? So can we incorporate it into like a design standard of if a street, I mean, not necessarily burying all the utilities, but like if a street's getting redone, if it's gonna be torn up, like 3rd Street and Douglas are going to be, can we just incorporate it of seeing if it's cost effective to bury it at that time? Like I feel like if we're gonna be tearing up the street anyway, why not do it and make it look nice and not have utility lines running down the.
I think it's a matter of control. We don't control the utilities. I mean, it's our right-of-way, but they're entitled to that right-of-way in their use, right? So, I mean, we can come up with our own designs, but frankly, it doesn't matter. It's their utility, it's their asset. They're going to do their own design, and they'll do their own benefit cost assessment, and they will set the price. I mean, when we go out to do the work for our project, the utilities already completed their work, or they're contracting separately to have their work done. We don't contract the relocation of Evergy's utility or Spire's utility or AT&T's. All that work is done by the utility. We have no jurisdictional control over the utility.
Then how do other cities do it? I mean, not using Evergy maybe, but how do other cities on the Missouri side and Kansas side, how are they doing this?
Well, some cities have their own utility company.
Some cities like Independence have their own electric utility. We do not. You know, I don't know that I wouldn't say that all cities are doing it. You know, I think they're at the same mercy that we are. Some cities are building out newer roads where I said, like, you know, if I'm cutting in a brand new Todd George Parkway, there's no utility poles along Todd George Parkway north of Colburn Road. The utility's probably making a decision because it's more resilient to be underground. You know, it's more protected from these outages that are weather created to be underground. They're making a business decision to go underground. When you think about how South Johnson County has built out, those were all new roads. And, you know, as I'm recalling, when I drive in that part of the metropolitan area, they're above ground too. You know, they may not be as visible. And think about when you drive, even in our community, they're above ground, but they're not always visible. So you drive Longview Road to the west side of our community, there's above ground utilities, but they're not there because they're set off of the road some distance. And so we could have a design standard to acquire right of way. It does impact more property owners to make the appearance of above ground utilities, you know, less. We can diminish that aesthetic negative viewpoint. We can also, and I think you could start to what I would sort of like hide those utilities. We can use more treed streetscapes. We can do a lot of other strategies. And maybe that's where you don't see them in some other parts of the metropolitan area. They may be either longer term, more well-established roadways where the trees are more full grown. I would say probably the overhead utilities along Douglas, north of downtown, are less visible because you have a very large tree canopy.
So it sounds like that if we were to look at our landscape and buffer ordinances, we could probably, and I'm just throwing this out, we could probably require a larger tree diameter, which would mature faster, that would give the appearance, it would actually somewhat hide and beautify, like street trees and things like that grow up. You have to look for the line sometimes.
Well, what we would do is if we made a decision as a city to increase our typical section of right-of-way. You know, right now, your normal residential collector is 60 feet, and I'm not so certain our new subdivisions, it's a problem. It's probably our major thoroughfares where we've got more of the appearance or aesthetic concern. And so I guess maybe I'll use that example. Our normal arterial is anywhere from 100 feet, maybe at most 120 foot wide from outside to outside right-of-way. We could go to 140 feet, 180 feet, 200 feet. You see that's not uncommon in other parts of our metropolitan area. And just adding that additional 20 feet on each side pushes the envelope for where these utilities can be located. It also gives you the space for more streetscape.
And we don't have any developers that actually ask, do we have to bury utilities? Well, you know, because most of our new developments, the interior of the development, they're buried, correct?
That's correct. Our subdivision ordinance requires both electrical and telephone lines specifically to be buried.
Well, action item.
So, yeah, I guess what questions do you have that you want us to come back to address? I think I've got a pretty good feel for the interest is in aesthetics of our downtown corridors as well as our arterial gateways, really just all arterials that come into the city, most heavily traveled roads.
I think that's the major predicate there, just the entrances into the city for beautification process, what the cost analysis would that be to bury utilities in entrances, and then maybe look at, of course, I'm looking at the chairman of the CEDC, ordinances of I think you would have the buffers and landscapes and right away.
Yeah, we don't have time to address that.
Okay.
I'm sure Mr. Elam is
Mr.
anxious to
Elam.
put that on the agenda.
Chair, if I may, I just would say that I think the issue that we're discussing is less applicable in the new development just because of our current ordinances associated with that. It's more of a challenge in our roadway reconstructions and more of our standard section that wouldn't really be subject to the UDO.
Okay.
Well, it just sounds like we're going to readopt our tree plan that we've, seem to have lost, right?
Well, we're working on a tree plan.
Oh, okay.
And actually, part of that tree plan discussion is, do we need wider right-of-ways to accommodate more streetscape? So maybe these go together, but I think there's other research we're not able to address tonight is what assurances can we provide if we do pay for the undergrounding of a utility that other utilities or the same utility doesn't go above ground later in the same corridor? I think that's a question that we can go do more research and come back.
Right.
And the answer may be none, that we can't provide any assurance, which could weigh in to the influence of your decision. Do we pursue this any further? I think we can probably come up with some very generic estimates on a benefit cost, understanding that that's our own, that's not the utility, and we're at the mercy of the utility with regard to the cost, and we can maybe use an example project or two.
I think that's a good start. I mean, because number one, we have to know what the benefit analysis is. We have to know if we could get cooperation from the utilities, number one, before we spend the money. Okay, yeah.
Anything else on this particular subject we can look into before we come back? And I'll work with you, Chairman, tomorrow on when we're ready to bring that back.
Okay, All right, any other thoughts? No? Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Well, that brings us to roundtable. Any roundtable? Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. Okay, so I received an email today, I think all of council received an email today about just the Casey's and Lone Jack, they not liking the landscaping. So it made me think of, we were last week driving through Prairie Village, and my daughter noticed that a lot of the landscaping is a lot different, that they require a lot different landscaping of businesses in Prairie Village than what we do here. I didn't know is it an option to change landscaping? Like what we require of businesses and landscaping, or?
Yeah, so Chair, if I may,
Yes.
so we have a landscaping ordinance, that's part of the Unified Development Ordinance. So landscaping, the requirements there, landscape buffers, plants, number of plants, size of plants, all of that information is included in the UDO, and would really be a CEDC discussion item. And I know that this is one we've actually talked about, that looking at the landscaping ordinances for potential modifications to that has been something that's on the list of things to look at. I will say that one of the things that we currently have is we currently require like a 3-inch caliber tree when they're planted, or actually 3 or 4, and that's is a particular tree diameter that doesn't have very high success rate of living, and actually you go with a smaller tree has a higher chance of living and growing better. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, is actually decreasing the caliber size at initial, but there's also all sorts of discussions that you can have about number and all of that other information. But that's really a CDC and controlled through our Unified Development Ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything from you, Councilman Bredesen? Any roundtable from staff?
Yeah, I'd like to provide an update on a couple of different projects. One is the stormwater utility. Just to give an update, they've completed all of their scheduled stormwater utility advisory committee meetings. The last one wrapped up 2 weeks ago. And next step is a presentation, session number 2 with full city council. That's still scheduled for next Tuesday, so keep that on your radar. At that time, I believe staff and the consultant will present the proposed plan, plan supported by the SWAC, that Stormwater Advisory Committee, and seek direction from the council on proceeding with their recommendations. The other project update is on Little Blue River Watershed Study. The United States Army Corps of Engineers, in partnership with other Eastern Jackson County agencies, including the City of Lee Summit, have undertaken this study. The last meeting was held just a few weeks ago, where what they call their vertical team at the Corps and all these other partnering agencies, including Lee Summit, were present to review a couple of particular areas of focus. One is the flood risk mitigation strategies, and then the ecological restoration measures. And starting to categorize those 2 primary areas with a lot of alternatives analysis and some additional recommendations on where to proceed next. They also then reviewed their overall project schedule, and I think in the course of identifying these alternatives and models, at least in one of the areas, they're seeking an additional 5 months to their current scope. And so there might be a little delay, but I think it's worthwhile. A project of this size that impacts over 2/3 of our community is worth doing right. You think back the last time a study of this size was done was the late 60s and resulted in Lake Jacomo and Longview Lake. I think it's important we find the right strategies for Lee Summit and Jackson County. But nonetheless, the draft report, without that 5-month delay, is currently scheduled on April of 2024. So we're a little less than a year from that draft report being finalized.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Any questions on either of those 2?
Do you guys have any questions?
No, okay. And the last and final thing I had was just make mention that Browning Street project is completed. It's been opened. They're having a celebration. Our contractor, Amino Brothers, is facilitating and hosting this Friday at noon. If you, as council members, would like to stop by, or as chair of the License Tax Committee, you're invited to attend. It will be out on site at the R&D parking lot. So if you're familiar with that area, the Browning Street project was one funded by the license tax. It's really the first of 3 projects associated with that interchange area, the second being Highway Patrol Troop A's relocation, and the third being kind of the capstone, the whole interchange reconstruction. So getting that alternative access into that industrial development area and really making it more ripe for redevelopment was a big step for our community, and that's done. So you're all invited to come out. It's just an informal celebration. Contractor, design staff, adjacent property owners, there to mingle and kind of celebrate the completion of that job.
And that begins at noon, correct?
That begins at noon this Friday.
And does it go to a certain time?
I believe it's probably just about an hour's time. They're going to have food and drink, and people just, again, enjoy the company and celebrate the project.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Staff? Well, with that, I will adjourn this meeting at 6:04 p.m. Thank you. Thank you all. Oh, I was going to say when the next Public Works was, but I'll just tell them. It's July 10th. It's July 10th. It's a month from now.
Are you guys going?